but the description I originally used was Lord of the Rings meets Raiders of the Lost Ark and the Maltese Falcon. Ed Greenwood, the creator of Forgotten Realms, and he's playing Elminster, his sort of wizard character, and so I'm playing Merrick Stakhaneth. We're fighting the battle on a deck of an airship that's crashing, and then on good measure, that's on fire!
Alright folks, get ready to dive deep into the amazing world of Eberron with a guest today, the legendary Keith Baker. From creating the world of Eberron to designing unforgettable characters and stories, Keith's work has inspired countless fans and gamers around the world. While Eberron is very popular in the Western world, it seems that the majority of Ukrainian community and D&D fans is still getting familiar with it. So Keith, we hope with this video we can bring more RPG fans into Eberron on this side of the globe. So, grab your dice and let's roll with the man himself.
First question to you, Keith. Obviously, welcome to our podcast. The first question would be, how would you, so to say, sell Eberron to a newcomer who is rather new to tabletop RPG? Maybe you can provide some touchstones like movies, books, video games.
So first off, thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here. Eberron it draws on two sort of three core principles. The first is it's very much inspired by sort of pulp adventure, sort of high energy, over the top, action. At the same time, it also draws on sort of noir intrigue, sort of mystery, shades of gray, stories don't always end well. And basically it tries to sort of be inspired by both of those things, and you decide where you want your story to fall on that scale. The other thing that is particularly distinctive about Eberron is that it's a world in which magic is incorporated into everyday life. That in Dungeons & Dragons, arcane magic, as used by wizards and such, it behaves like a science. And so with Eberron, we said, well, that means it should be used like a science. It should be harnessed and become part of everyday life. Looking to movies, this is now sadly out of date because, we made it 20 years ago, but the description I originally used was Lord of the Rings meets Raiders of the Lost Ark and the Maltese Falcon. So, it is a fantasy setting, and yet again, you've got that action adventure, and you've got, at the same time, sort of a lot of intrigue and mystery and, sort of complexity to the politics and the story.
I want to follow a question on that. So
Sure.
you are saying that you originally were aiming for Lord of the Rings and Maltese Falcon, right? So those are rather fantasy, so to say, full fantasy genre, right? But for me, and I know many people share this thought, that it's somewhat of a steampunkish vibe. Yeah,
absolutely. I was using Lord of the Rings as definitely like a baseline, as saying take fantasy and then add all this other stuff to it. You're absolutely right that in more recent terms, like I said, that was 20 years ago. In more recent terms, like one of the things that definitely has the same sort of feeling as Eberron is the cartoon Arcane. If you've seen it based on League of Legends, like to me, that's the closest that's out there right now to an Eberron cartoon. It's that same vibe because it's a world where magic is industrial. The reason I don't usually use the word steampunk is because there's no steam. It's all about magic. It's saying, what if you harnessed magic the way we use technology, instead of a lot of settings where magic and technology exist side by side? Other things that sort of are major sort of elements of Eberron that sort of define the setting. First of all, this magical economy is dominated by a number of very powerful families, the dragon-marked houses. And those sort of fill the same role as mega corporations in like the cyberpunk genre. Like you just have these powerful corporate forces that at this point may actually be more powerful than any one nation. And so that's another sort of way in which, while it's fantasy, it actually draws on things that we sometimes more associate with either modern day or cyberpunk. And also, something that I fear will be too familiar to you, one of the things of Eberron is the idea that it has just come out of a terrible war. That basically you had a united kingdom, Galifar, that 100 years ago broke into civil war and split into 5 nations. And as of the opening of the setting, that war has just come to an end with a terrible disaster that destroyed one of the 5 nations, and that as yet no one knows how it happened. So it is both, the flavor is kind of a little bit of the end of World War I, but also a little bit of the Cold War following World War II, where the point is we don't know what caused the mourning. We are afraid that it could happen again. So that's why I was saying you get a little of that sort of film noir aspect of there is this sort of essentially realism to it that you don't get in some things. And, part of the question when you're making a character for Eberron is, how did the war affect you? What did you do? If you were a fighter, did you fight in the war? And if not, what were you doing instead? So everybody sort of, I think part of the point to me is what I like about it is when you come into the story, when you're making your character, if you're just saying, I'm just a dwarf fighter, you're not just a dwarf fighter. We're going to stop and say, okay, where did you fight? Who were you doing? There's a lot of ways to give everyone a sense of story and place in the world because of that. And you have that point. How did the war affect you? How do the dragon marked houses? Do you have any connection to them, or are you opposed to them? And it's very much where you could do the Indiana Jones style, we're just traveling the world trying to stop the Emerald Claw from getting, the Orb of Dol Nazur, or you could do a story that's much more grounded in the Cold War, in the politics, in the sort of aftermath that people are dealing with. And so it has that spectrum of, again, just pure adventure, if that's what you want to do. One of the things I've described is we have airships in Eberron, because again, industrialized magic. And one of the things I say in the latest book is basically what's better than, fighting a battle on the deck of an airship? Well, fighting the battle on a deck of an airship that's crashing, and then on good measure, that's on fire. It's like, how can you sort of get the energy, one more notch up? But then also at the same...
High stakes, yes.
Exactly, and that's the challenge to that, is you want to raise the stakes. You want things to be dangerous. So one other thing I'll mention, just because it is something that people associate with Eberron, you first off have the class, the Artificer, was created for Eberron, because the Artificer is like a magical engineer. And it is that whole idea that Eberron is where we deal with magic as a science. And tied to that, you have the Warforged. And the Warforged are essentially sentient golems that were built to fight in the last war. And so that is a player option in Eberron. And it's one of the things that's sort of unique to the world, because you have this sort of sense of, I was built for this war. The war is over. What do I do now?
Yeah.
Maybe I'll just sum up what you said. So it seems to me that, while Eberron has a solid lore behind it, each person can twist it and flavor it however they want. If they want steampunk, you go steampunk. If you want cyberpunk, you go there. Mage punk, like Arcane, or what was the game? Arcanum, right?
Arcane.
No, Arcanum.
No, yeah, Arcanum, right? Something like this.
Arcanum,
Yeah, well, yeah, and then you go there, right? So it's the beauty that it can be as appealing as you want it to be. For you in particular.
Right. And that is the point, is that Eberron basically, it gives you a very wide spectrum to draw on. It gives you this foundation, but it's very much up to you. Do you want the dark, gritty story? Do you want the over-the-top, just exciting adventure? There's a lot of ways you can go. Do you want espionage? Do you want... In Rising from the Last War, the official Eberron book that was released for 5th edition by Wizards of the Coast, one of the things we have is group patrons. And the point of that is that helps you sort of shape what kind of story are we telling. Are you part of a detective agency? Are you, newspaper reporters? Are you a military unit? Like, it's saying these are types of stories you can tell in Eberron. Which do you want to do? And there was something else you said that made me think of something, but I forget now. So carry on.
Yeah,
Okay.
Groups Patron is such a great idea to contextualize your character in the world of Eberron. So you can feel, I'm playing Eberron, not just like any other fantasy setting. And personally, I'm a big fan of cyberpunk. And I find Eberron so much gripping to me. That's a really good analogy you provided, like those mega corporations, last war, tough times. This is like dark future, this velocity of life, the speed of life. You die, you live fast, you die young. You cannot be happy and old in Eberron, in my Eberron at
You
least.
can.
And that's exactly right. That's the point to me, is it's fantasy, but it draws on the flavor of settings like noir, like cyberpunk, things that we don't usually associate conversely with something like Lord of the Rings. And so it does just give you a very different flavor. When I compare it to something like Forgotten Realms, the point is that Forgotten Realms is more like Lord of the Rings, it is more classic high fantasy, whereas Eberron just has a very different sort of, it is still fantasy, but it's a very different vibe. Now, the point that you just said in my Eberron, and I do just want to call that out because it is what you were saying earlier as well, that is what we have always said with Eberron is supposed to be something you can draw on for inspiration. It is a starting point. But in the design of it, we've always said what we want is for you as the dungeon master to make it your own and decide what kind of story is it that you're telling. If there's something you want to add, if there's something you want to change, we want you to do that. We want you to make it feel like it's your Eberron, not that you're limited because, we didn't say, guns are a good example. In the base setting, we don't have firearms in it. We encourage people to use we have wand slingers, and people are using cantrips. Like I said, they're using magic instead of technology. On the other hand, if you really want to have gunslingers, have gunslingers. I'm not going to come to your house and stop you. So it is that point of, again, at the end of the day, all of this is about creating stories that we love. And what we're trying to do is give you a solid foundation to build on, but you should do with it what you want.
And it feels right. It feels right when you fulfill these little gaps as a storyteller. It doesn't feel like you break the system or something like this.
Drawing on this.
Go on.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say one concrete example of that is the Morning, which is one of the nations has been destroyed by this magical cataclysm. And in the core setting, it only happened 2 years ago, in the core setting, we don't give an answer to what caused the Morning. Because part of what I love about it is that as you are playing in Eberron, it means you don't know the answer. There's lots of possibilities, but it's up to the dungeon master to decide what is the answer in their version of the story. And what I like is that if I came and you ran an Eberron campaign for me, even though I made the world, I don't know all the answers because I don't know the decisions you've made. And so, like I said, we give that framework, but it's up to you to add the finishing touches and to decide what's best for the story you want to tell.
Yeah, it's really cool. I fall in love with Eberron the moment I read it, and it came a lot, the comparison with Forgotten Realms and Eberron. It was really beautiful how it encouraged the creativity of the masters and the players in a way that it always will feel like your world. At each table it will be slightly different, maybe significantly different. I know players that run, masters that run some significant, some of the countries no longer exist if you run the long campaign, So about that, I'm running a number of campaigns in Eberron for my friends, and some of them are present here, and some of them are not. But one of my friends loves Eberron with burning passion and is a big fan of yours, Kit. He does a lot of this like player generated creativity, and he recently commissioned an emblem for the Guild of Endless Doors.
Oh,
and
nice.
He commissioned sort of art of his characters. I think you may have seen one of them with a rooster in a hat.
Yes. Is this the
that's-
Kalistar Bard?
It's
Yeah.
Kalistar Bard
Silver
is
Flame Bard.
one campaign. His character in one campaign, and in my campaign, he's playing the magistrate of Threshold. So
Yeah, no. Oh, see, I don't think I've seen a picture of that yet. So that's
Yeah.
exciting to see.
So-
But yeah, he has sent me some of his art, and that's been fantastic.
Yeah,
And Threshold, of course, is another thing I've been doing, on my Patreon where I started it, obviously, and was sort of narrowing a focus and basically, this is another good example of traditionally Eberron has more of, again, that sort of pulp noir, cyberpunk, all of those. Just over the last couple years, I started running a campaign that is set on the frontier between Breland and Droim, and that has more of a traditional sort of Western story, where it's this lawless frontier. And obviously, you've picked up on that, and we have we will have a book coming out later this year. But it's a perfect example of that is something that wasn't there 20 years ago, but it's another story that fits Eberron and that you can tell. And so, again, I really love the setting because it has lots of room for those different types of stories.
yeah, and this makes this internal logic of Eberron. I like it very much, and in some cases it is really easy to draw parallels with the real world. For example, magical industry is a real industry. Dragon market houses are corporations. It makes it easy to improvise in it. But on the other hand, Eberron is still a fantasy world with magic, different planes of existence and all that. And in some cases, the parallels with real world doesn't work as well. What do you think about those parallels?
It's absolutely the case that was the intent. Is what we wanted is sometimes settings will just absolutely take a piece of the real world and put it into the fantasy. Like, things where it's like, this is basically Egypt or this is basically Japan. And, they just drop it in and change the name. And I've never liked that. I've never liked it when it's like, this is clearly our world and we're just going to pretend, we're just going to change a couple of the names. And so with Eberron, the goal was, again, to have things that feel real, like you feel the connection. Like the point of the Dragon Mark houses is we understand them because they bring up many of the issues we deal with major corporations. And yet it's not like there is a Dragon Marked house that is supposed to be Amazon or supposed to be Google or anything like that. And it's the same with the war. The war draws parallels to World War I or World War II, but it's not either of those. It's just something that we can connect to because we understand the pain and the cost that those things bring, even though, again, it is not just our world. And so to me, the goal with that is by taking that approach, by saying, here are things that feel real, even though they're not directly real. Hopefully it is also easy for the masters to then bring in other things to say, okay, well, how would this problem fit in? So yeah, that's the goal, is that because it has real world touchstones, it just hopefully is easier for people who don't know the world at all to connect to it, because they can pick up on one of those aspects.
Yeah, if Google is Dragonmont House, then House Civis won, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. And that's the thing. Like there's ways you can take things. Like House Civis, you can look at it as something like Google, or you can look at it as something like the NSA. Like the whole thing is they could be tapping everybody's calls if you decide that that's what you want them to be doing. It's very much, I like playing with the Dragon Marked houses as kind of sinister forces. as ooh, what are they doing? Are they dangerous? At the same time, if you don't, you can just play with them as being perfectly, happy service providers. You aren't forced into making them cyberpunk mega corporations, but the option is there if you want to. But it is still, that does fit into how it feels real. Again, the point is we have a company that deals with long distance communication. We have the house that deals with air transportation. We have medicine. Like, medicine is an industry. It's dealt with by House Jarasco. You aren't going to a temple and having a priest heal you. You're going to a hospital, And so, those are like little ways in which Eberron breaks some of the molds. Another thing that is interesting to me, because it is something that has become more common in all the major settings over the last 20 years, but Eberron was the first to sort of the major settings to push this mold, was basically making the definition of good and evil a little less clear-cut, and in particular, especially making monsters more complicated and less just, two-dimensional things to kill. And so in Eberron, first off, just since you're in Threshold is on the border between a nation of humans and a nation of monsters, a nation created by Medusas, by gargoyles, by harpies. And it's just that part of saying, a lot of what Eberron is about is basically saying, well, if you actually stop and look at how things are presented in D&D, logically X should follow. Logically, these monsters are as intelligent as people. Why would they just live in caves and wait for adventurers to come and kill them? Why would they not create their own societies and adventures? Eberron also, just in terms of things that would make it appealing to people, it just does take a lot of the classic, like, Lord of the Rings tropes and turn them on their head a little. So, for example, gnomes often have been presented as just sort of comic relief. Oh, they're funny, they're cute. In Eberron, they are funny and cute, but they also basically have a vicious surveillance state and are like really dangerous spies and assassins. And the dwarves are captains of industry. The elves, you are sort of deeply tied to death and undeath, and you have an elf culture that are basically like deadly warrior nomads, sort of keeping their ancestors alive by emulating them, trying to be avatars for the heroes of the past. And on the other hand, you have this elven culture that's sort of obsessed with death and undeath, that preserves their ancestors and are sort of ruled by, the undying court. And so again, it's taking sort of a lot of the traditional species we're familiar with, but doing something very different. The halflings are dinosaur riding barbarians, so it's a different sort of flavor.
Yeah, I have a question, a little swift from the theme. So, you have been involved in gaming industry for many, many years. As you have told, like, you began with the idea of Eberron like 20 years ago, am I correct? So,
Just about, yeah.
Around. So, you have seen it evolve, the industry and the game community, and how it has changed over the time. So, at your perspective, what are some trends or developments in this game industry that you find most exciting? Maybe some shift in the game or some trends. And what do you think the future of gaming looks like? How do you see your Eberron would evolve?
So it's interesting. So Eberron was designed for the 3rd edition of Dungeons and Dragons, and every edition has made changes. And some people were like, "Well, does that mean it doesn't work anymore?" And just to speak in a very specific, nerdy, specific point, there are actually a couple of changes over the last 2 editions that really fit Eberron well, and those are the introduction of cantrips, 0-level spells that people can use at will, and rituals, which is the idea that a number of useful but non-combat spells you can cast without using a spell slot. And both of those really fit Eberron's idea of a magical economy, that we want this to be a setting where it is valid for a person to be a wand slinger, to just, use combat cantrips the way we would use guns. And so that all sort of fits and makes Eberron, whereas frankly in 3rd edition, if you were a wizard, first level wizard, you cast your 2 magic missiles and then you're just shooting someone with a crossbow or something because you're out of spell slots. And so I do like this trend to sort of letting magic be a more powerful part of things. With that said, looking to the bigger, broader trends, part of what I feel, I do think just every edition has something, it's all about what is it trying to accomplish, and each one does something well. 3rd edition is, of the last 3, the most complicated and the most sort of deep simulationist. And the point is, because of that, it rewards people who really dig into it and really, want to know everything. And you can go very deep with it in a way that to a certain degree you can't in the more recent settings. But that makes it difficult for the casual player to get into it. 4th edition drew a lot on MMORPGs. It was taking inspiration from those. And there are things that were very interesting about that. It made it accessible to a different group of people, but it did also give it a very different flavor from traditional D&D. And then 5th edition has tried to sort of bridge that gap and sort of hold on to the classic tropes of D&D while still being more accessible than 3rd edition. What I personally think, as we look into the next edition, first off, you have things like the Dungeons & Dragons movie coming out. Like, you have things where Dungeons & Dragons, between Stranger Things, between all of this, Dungeons & Dragons is becoming a thing that more and more people are aware of and interested in. And because of that, it makes sense to me that the next edition, they will be trying to make the game more accessible to a casual audience. And I expect that does mean that they will try to simplify some of the systems. Right now, any form of D&D, you have a lot of stats, you have a lot of saving, you've got saving throws, stats, proficiencies, you've got like a lot of numbers to track and a lot of things to track. And I will not be surprised if they do try to simplify that for the future. Even also, a lot of how people interact with gaming these days is through streaming. But the simple fact is that D&D's combat was not designed with streaming in mind. It's not necessarily that interesting to watch a group of people doing a fight. And it would not surprise me if they try and make a system that is essentially more conducive to streaming, that is essentially more entertaining for an outside viewer. And that may mean that they will, drop a few things or change a few things that people will say, how could you do that? But it is the fact, when you stop and think about it, D&D is a game that we have been playing for over 40 years. And if you turn that around and think of it as a video game, if I told you that we've got a video game and we're using an engine that's 40 years old, most people would think, well, why aren't we making that, faster, updating it? Why are we using this sort of antiquated system instead of making something that is the most efficient we can today? And I don't think 4th edition in some ways kind of went too far. Like 4th edition showed that people didn't like it when it didn't feel like D&D, and that's the challenge. But I do think that the next edition will try and find ways to streamline things, to make it more accessible to a casual audience, and to make it more comfortable for streaming. So, just my guess.
By the way, continuing the topic of evolution, right? So you mentioned the more of a change in the mechanics or maybe just basic approaches to something. But I noticed that the lore of Eberron also evolved, and I'm judging that by comparing 3.5 edition Blood of Wall with the one in 5th edition, right? So in 5th edition, it's more of a religion, about being prepared for harsh world, being like in a community, in a small community of your people that you hold on to. And in 3.5 edition, it's more of a grim, edgy, I want to say edgy, necromancer type religion. Right. So how in general, sorry, let me finish that. How in general the lore of Eberron evolved throughout editions.
So basically, that's a good point. And a lot of times what that was is that my original vision didn't quite come out in the first original 3.5 book. So the Blood of Vol is a good example of where I was going with this, was wanting to again challenge some of the traditional tropes of saying in Eberron you can't rely on things that we normally would think of as being good or evil as actually being good or evil. So the original idea with the Blood of Vol was to say that we wanted essentially this faith driven around necromancers that is strongly associated with undead, and yet to say, but they're not actually evil. And from the start, now with third edition, the idea was that you had this organization, the Order of the Emerald Claw. And the Order of the Emerald Claw was straight up supposed to be just villains. Because, like I said, we had that pulp. There is a place to have the people that you just know they're bad, and when they show up, you know the thing to do is to fight them. Like if the Order of the Emerald Claw shows up, you know you want to stop them. You're never supposed to stop and think, maybe this time they're doing something good. You know, the Order of the Emerald Claw is always bad. But what we wanted to say was that the Blood of Vol, that the Emerald Claw is an extremist group using the Blood of Vol's beliefs. And that, again, comes back to our world, where you can see any number of cases where you have a faith or a movement, but an extreme group of it twists those beliefs and makes them, evil. And that was how it was supposed to be, was that the Emerald Claw were bad, but that the Blood of Vol, as you said, is more, it's grim. The idea of the Blood of Vol is it was just taking one of the basic philosophical questions we do struggle with, which is what just God would allow suffering and death in the world? Why is there suffering if there is a benevolent force? And the idea is the Blood of Vol says there's not. The fact that there is death and suffering tells us that the universe is against us, that all we have is each other, and that death is something to fight. And so that's that point, that there's supposed to be a dark, gloomy faith. But as you said, their answer to that is we have to stand by each other. We have to fight because the universe, is against us. And so it's supposed to be very sharply contrasted to the Silver Flame, which is a very much, we are part of the light, help everyone, like a sort of traditional paladin faith, if you will. Whereas the idea of the Blood of Vol was to say, not every good guy has to be tied to the light. You can have these people who are coming from a place of grim stoicism, and yet at the same time, ultimately, what they are doing is trying to protect the people they care about and trying to overcome what they see as an unjust universe. So that's definitely one. There's a couple other sort of key points like that I'll see if they come to my mind as we go, where it is like this is an idea that didn't come out quite the way I wanted it to in third edition, that we have evolved over that. It's also the case that over the last 2 years, or 3 years, I've been able to write books for the Dungeon Masters Guild. And so I've made Exploring Eberron and Chronicles of Eberron are 2 books that let me cover things that just were never covered in the original books, going into more details about Eberron's plains, going into details about the oceans and aquatic civilizations, and, things like that were never really trained. One other point I will make, another thing that we changed between third and fifth, the dwarves in third edition were one of the least interesting sort of forces in Eberron. basically the idea was that they control the mines, they control precious metals. And so it was sort of an analog to like oil barons, the idea that, oh, they're this small nation, but they have a lot of power because they have resources. So that's sort of where we were going with that, was just emulating the way that resource-rich nations can wield outsized power in our world. But they still just weren't that interesting compared to dinosaur riding halflings or, undead elves. We've evolved that in 5th edition. So basically, they have a split where they have been fighting sort of the force of aberrations and the far realm in Eberron. This is where mind flayers come from. This is where beholders come from. And the idea is that the dwarves beneath the Moorholds had been sort of fighting, these sort of aberrant forces, and that some of the dwarves are essentially stealing their technology. They're using what are called symbionts, and they're sort of adapting these organic tools and weapons with the idea of using them against the enemy. But it's that point of saying, sort of half of society, dwarven society, sort of experimenting with this organic science, which the other half think is horrifying and this should be left alone. But that, again, has added what I like. One of the things I like with Eberron is in the 5 nations, we explore magic as an everyday thing. In Droam, the nation of monsters, we explore what if you had monstrous abilities? What if you had the strength of ogres? What if you had, the flight of harpies? How would you build a society around that? In Sarlona, we have a society driven by psionics. Now in the Moorholds, we're saying, okay, what if you did have organic technology? What if you did try and take aberrations and make them something you could use? What would that look like? Like, I like exploring how a tool affects a culture.
But from what I read, they are far from like having miners that have these big claws that they dig through the tunnels or something, right? So they are just on this stage of experimentation, right?
Absolutely, that's the idea. It's still very early. It's the ones who are doing with it are just starting to figure it out, and they have living armor and they have hungry weapons and things like that. But yeah, that's the point. They haven't gotten that far. It's only something they've been doing for like a decade. So it's very much that it's something that's evolving. But I like that.
What's
idea.
A decade for a dwarf, right?
Yeah. But I like that idea of giant mole claws that they could dig with. I mean, that's what I'm saying, is maybe in another decade, that's what we're going to be looking at.
Tony's playing Ruinbound in one of the campaigns. That's why he's so interested.
Oh yeah. And that's exactly right. And that's the point of the Ruinbound. Are basically dwarves that have been sort of affected by essentially almost the radiation of this, that as they have been fighting the Dalkir, some of this has sort of seeped in and created these sort of mutated dwarves who carry some of this. And again, it's a perfect point of some people are afraid of them, but they're not inherently evil. They're just strange. That's another big thing that is like one of those themes that people can identify with and touch on, is you have the dragon marked houses, the powerful corporations, and the basis of their power is that they have dragon marks, which are these sort of marks on the skin, and that run through a bloodline, and that give members of that bloodline specific magical power and allow them to do things other people can't do, which is how they maintain, and with ruthless monopolies, maintain the industry. You also then have people who develop what are called aberrant dragon marks. And the idea of aberrant dragon mark is anyone can develop it. They aren't hereditary, they aren't passed on, but anyone can develop one. And that the powers they grant are often sort of dangerous, where the standard dragon marks are constructive. They build, they heal, they allow travel. Aberrant dragon marks, give you the ability to produce fire, to terrify people, to control the minds. And the idea is that those are not evil, but the houses basically have stirred up a propaganda campaign against them and caused them to be feared and persecuted. And so that is, again, another way, like if you want to play a character who's a little bit of an outsider unjustly, playing a character with an aberrant dragon mark is a way to be sort of struggling against the way people perceive you, even though, again, you are not actually evil or anything like that.
Yeah, that's really an interesting theme of what would you do with the power you have? Like, would you like to abuse it? Would you like to chase for more power? Would you like to align with other mega corporations and defeat other sources of possible opportunities? And it's really adds this pillar of politics in your game, and the theme that are the aberrant dragon marks actually evil, or do the mega corporation wants us to believe in it? Yeah.
And just to touch on it, it's exactly that. That's the point. That is a story I love to explore. That is a story that I love getting into. But you can just say, if we just want to do the Indiana Jones, we're running around exploring ruined temples, that's great. And you can buy a sword from House Cannith. Like, you don't have to go down that path if that's not the path you want to take, but it's all there if you want it.
Yeah, that's why we love to have different Eberron campaigns in different styles, and like it is still an Eberron, but each different campaign is like the whole other game. It's like the whole other story.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so as a creator of this setting, of this Eberron, personally, what was the most challenging part for you to figure out about Eberron as you were working on it?
So certainly, the most challenging things, like when I originally wrote it, I didn't do any of the mechanics. Like, I proposed the ideas, I described the Warforged, I described the dragon marks. But then we had a year, of me working with wizards, sort of figuring out how do they actually work. So, obviously one of the sort of most complicated things that has changed a lot between editions are the Warforged. So the Warforged are, again, sentient golems. And it's always been a challenge to find ways to balance them, giving them the flavor of being essentially artificial life forms while not unbalancing them. Like the original 3.5 Warforged were not only did they not eat, sleep, or breathe, they were immune to disease, they were also immune to exhaustion. And that gave you a lot of like things you could do. Like, I'm going to be a crazy barbarian, but because I'm a Warforged barbarian, I never get exhausted. And, it sort of threw a lot of things off, and they were immune to poison, and they couldn't be level trained. There was like all kinds of things. And so over the editions, there's been a lot of trying to balance that out and to make them feel like they aren't overpowered, while at the same time still making sure they feel like Warforged, and you don't just feel like I'm just, another person. So obviously those are challenging. The dragon marks are challenging, and the way we've used them in 3rd edition, they were driven by feats, but 5th edition doesn't have as many feats. You don't get as many, and so that didn't really work. And so we took a different approach there, tying them to your species. But that's sort of the point. Is the idea? I won't say it's easy, but it's not the hardest part, but getting the balance, how to sort of make that so it both comes out in the world but is also fair and balanced, is a challenge. The Artificer is another one where we designed it for 3rd edition, and then with those later settings trying to capture the original flavor has been hard. I like the current Artificer, but it took a while of sort of tweaking it back and forth to get something that was both balanced and also still had the flavor of being a magical engineer. I will say, this is just me, but I'm going to be honest, I do feel in 5th edition there's a number of the monsters in Eberron that I don't feel really have the weight of the originals. Like the Quarry in particular are nightmare spirits, and just I don't feel like the 5th edition interpretation really they don't feel as dangerous as they did before. So that kind of thing is always a little bit of a challenge, because You're trying to capture something, in a new edition. And so yeah.
Any monster book in the plans, maybe?
Not at the moment. But that's the thing, is that monsters are very concretely mechanical, and mostly what I have done with my books is more trying to get across the ideas. I do have, in the books I've produced for the DMs Guild, there are monsters. Each of the new books has a Dalkir, Exploring Eberron has Archfey, some of the unique Archfey of Eberron. And it does have actually a new quarry, so it's like that, but it's not like it's a monster manual. It's like each book has probably like a dozen monsters, not like 100 monsters. And it could be that I'll make more monsters in the future. It's mainly just there's so much I'd like to do and there's so little time that we'll see. I'll certainly say I have made monsters for Threshold that will be in the product we're going to release later this year. So, I have stats for Orlask and his cultists. I have stats for the Horned King, and so those are things that you will get, when Threshold finally comes out.
All right. Right now we're in the middle of campaign. Yeah. I'm sorry. We'll cut that out. Yeah. So we are in the middle of campaign. We're in the middle of campaign, and we're approaching to challenging Orlask for a battle.
There you go. Yeah. Well, I'm just saying, drop me a line, John. Maybe I can let you play test the stats.
That would be cool. I have a couple of stat blocks around, and
well, you can see what we did and decide.
But yeah, definitely. If Tony will close their ears and maybe you
no, absolutely not.
know what Hand of Orlask does in your Eberron. Yeah, if you can send me that would be really cool.
Let's see what we can do.
All right. By the way, regarding this creativity of fans around Eberron, right? So it's as John mentioned, it's rather easy to take some concept from real world or just generate an idea of yours inside your Eberron that you're having at your table. And obviously, you are very generous with communicating with fans, which we all appreciate. I assume you are using some of the fans' input in your work, right? In your books, and maybe you can share some examples of the ones you liked.
So it's interesting. Honestly, I generally haven't as much because I have been thinking about Eberron for so long that usually I have an opinion on everything. So I always sort of encourage people to make it their own. Oh, no. I'm just saying I always encourage people to make it their own, but I don't immediately have, here's the list. I will say this is just the example that always comes to mind because I love it. Is an example of something that came up in conversation with fans was someone presented the idea that dragon marks might actually be the creation of the Dalkir, the flesh warping folks who made the Mind Flayers and the Beholders. And I love that as a concept, that this thing that everybody thinks, this is a blessing, this is a great thing, is actually like this deeply unnatural, these alien creatures have come in and sort of fused the prophecy to flesh. And I love the idea of that being sort of discovered, that, the dragon marks aren't some, blessing. They're actually this weird alien experiment. And, as I say, I haven't personally had the campaign where that's come out, but that is in my brain. That's the way I think of them now. I just love that as an idea because it even makes sense. They're relatively recent, and it is this question of why did the dragon marks appear? And I'm like, that's totally something the Dalkir could do if they wanted to. And so, as I said, I haven't experimented with that. Usually, it is. I love the fact that with the DMs Guild, there is so much more Eberron content out there than there was before. And there are lots of books that have been made by people who I respect and who, I'm sure their work is good. It's just, as I said, usually in my case, I'm just frankly both A, so busy, and B, I have so many opinions. I have everything that I want to do it my way. So it's not something that I've actually incorporated a lot of outside stuff into.
By the way, on that note, that reminded me of an idea that our friend had. So she was like DMing a campaign for in Mournlands.
Yep.
And she figured out living dragon marks, like the living spells there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which was like, for me, it was like eye-opening thing, and it opened a lot of other mechanics and other monsters that you can put in the face of your players. So, yeah.
No, I think that's fantastic, and that is another thing I'll just mention that was interesting when we first did it. Was this idea of the Mournland is this strangely warped magical wasteland, and one of the creatures that was fun that we originally added was living spells. This idea of like magic becoming this sort of solid ooze. You'd have a living fireball, and once you sort of put that out there, it was fun just thinking of every possible spell. Like, well, what does a living color spray look like, or a living hypnotic pattern? And I think living dragon marks are a great idea. It
Living wish.
Makes sense. Living wish is that's gonna, but it's fun to think about. If you basically have this reality vortex that like completely can change reality in its radius, it's a fun thing to think of players having to deal with. So.
And have dangerous expedition into.
Mournlands,
Yeah.
I will say, coming back to ways in which we touch on everyday life and such, just again, because you're in that Threshold campaign, part of that point of Threshold is it's on that border between the nation of, the Old Kingdom and between the monsters. And the Monster Nation is another good example, because not only is it this sort of rising nation that's very different from how we usually think of monsters, where different monsters are working together to sort of use their abilities for the common good, but it is also that example of it's not recognized as a nation by the others. And like that is a potential, one of my novels, The Queen of Stone, sort of deals with Droam trying to be recognized as a nation. So you have that sort of point of this small nation that people, are essentially afraid of and don't deal with. And that's part of the idea of monsters aren't just what we think of, but it's still, can they find a way to be accepted, to work with people or not? And that's a fun sort of story to explore.
I just want to add that the story told by, I don't remember the name, but this brilliant Duke, I think, who came with Thorn to the Grey Wall about Soramania. That was one of the best writings I ever read.
Oh, yeah. You're talking about...
chilling.
Yeah, no, it's I forget. It's in Queen of Stone. He's the I don't want to say Baron, but I'm not sure. But he's the ambassador going there, and that's part of what I like about it is the Droam is ruled by the daughters of Sorakel, who are these three hags, and part of the point of that in the story is to say that these are literally figures that people told fairy tales around. Like, that these are people that again, like parents used to scare their children. And now they've suddenly stepped out of the stories and into reality, and they're running a nation next door. And it's fun to sort of stop and think about what would that actually be like if these people that, you've been terrified of since you were a child, and suddenly they're real and they want to have a diplomatic meeting with you. And that, that was what that was sort of about there.
Yeah, actually, the story of Threshold, the kind of a place that protects, so to say, civilized world from the nation of monsters, it kind of hits close to home for us.
Yeah, I can understand. That is interesting to me. I'm just curious, like with the campaigns you're playing, what is it you enjoy about playing in Eberron at the moment? Like, what is it that either resonates to you about the setting, or that you're just enjoying as you're playing it?
Guys, go ahead.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah.
I'll be silent.
Yeah, because we're talking a lot.
No, I mean that I'm the master, and go ahead and tell Kid Baker about our campaigns.
Well, I'm just saying, yeah, I'm just curious, like what is it that you like about the campaign you're in, and we can just pretend that John isn't here, and you can tell me, oh, you don't like it at all, it's very unpleasant, and you wish you'd do something else. But is there something in particular, like about the Threshold campaign that you enjoy?
Alex?
Alex, you there? Do you hear us?
You don't play much,
Yeah.
I think. But you played a bit.
I missed a lot of Threshold recently, but yeah, I like the idea of the frontier town. Before we started our Threshold campaign, as you have started by yourself on your Patreon, I watched HBO TV show called Deadwood. And
absolutely.
I was like gripped with this idea of frontier town with new people from different states, from different cities, with different professions, and I wanted to play something badly, and I felt deep in my soul that the Eberron was the perfect choice for such campaign. So yeah, that was my main inspiration as a player for our Threshold campaign. I was just imagining those, players taking the roles of major players, the players in the Threshold. Somebody got to be magistrate, somebody got to be educator, priest, or whatever. And I like the sense of community. We started with in the train, we played almost 10 players or 9, I don't remember, and we just arriving in the Threshold. Everybody have its motives, goals. What do they want to start new in Threshold? What place are they looking for? Or maybe they have found this place and they want to implement themselves in the Threshold. I like this opportunity. You could play for total opportunities. You could make whatever choices you want and build your own town, your own adventures.
And
Kind of seems.
Yeah,
and absolutely, Deadwood was very much one of my inspirations for Threshold as well, because Deadwood, it has the combination of it's definitely not clear-cut good and evil. It's a lot of people finding their way, but also part of what I like with Threshold is exactly what you described about people having a stake in the town, that the town over time sort of becomes a character in the story, and that it's not just adventurers. It's are you the magistrate? Are you what is your interest? Why are you here? And that's just a very different kind of campaign than just, we're adventurers going into a dungeon looking for gold. And I like letting players explore that different kind of story and really build, feel a sense of community.
Yeah, I liked this also the sense of anarchism, the sense of the absence of the absolute power. There is nobody who controls the city. At least at the moment, we don't know about him. Actually, I used to also run this very same campaign as John.
We were co-DM at the start.
Yeah, we tried to co-DM, and I was so inspired by the Deadwood. I really loved the hook. The very first hook, where the man on the horse with the torch arriving in the city, saying there is a dead body, and all the city is in shock and panic.
Okay.
Yeah, and then later it turns out that there was some plot twist inside the city, some internal politic intrigue, and it was for me one of the greatest idea in DMing, I would say.
Excellent.
Tony?
For me, I want to tell you how I just met the Eberron lore in general. So John invited me to his another campaign, the one before Threshold, and for me, I personally never was invested in any of the D&D settings, right? So I knew about Sword Coast, the Fire Rune, and other stuff, right? But I never was kind of feeling that it is necessary for enjoying the game, right? So when I was DMing, I always came up with homebrew world based on either real world or something I saw in multiple TV shows or something like this, right? But when John said, well, he basically infected us all with the love for Eberron, and yeah, he was the first vampire who bit us all, right? So
you're speaking about that 1 hour lecture when everyone fall asleep.
100,000 hour lecture, so he was telling about Eberron, and I felt it too. Something sparked in me, and I was like, I don't want to make a generic character. I don't want to make a character that I can apply to any other setting, right? So at first I thought, I'm just in general saying that I will be a human fighter, right? So the most popular combination of class and race. And then I was, no, maybe I will try to do something different. Then I was started to dig deeper into Eberron. I was watching lots of videos. Unfortunately, I got a lot of spoilers on those videos. But
Fair enough.
Yeah.
What are you gonna do?
Yeah.
Every Eberron is different.
You still don't know what caused the morning.
Yep.
True.
Frankly speaking, I don't want to know.
Yeah.
So and I ended up with the idea at some point. I came up with the idea that I want to make a character where each 3 main combinations of main parts of the character, which is race, background, and class, would be something to role play for. So I took dragon marked Orion, the Blood of Vol cleric, and
Nice.
House Age, and kind of professor at Moorgrave, right? And it actually works together, right? And I didn't have to write 10 pages pre-story to put this all into one character. It all just jives, it all just works, and I came from first level to now I'm 7th level character, and it feels like I lived a life. It feels like I survived through all the adventures, and I'm not the same cleric Orion professor that I was on first level, right? So I came through iterations, and now I'm something different, right? And it's not just because I grew in levels, but because I evolved, and then I decided that I want to start my own campaign, and now I'm DMing my own campaign, and I find it very, very extremely easy to improvise at the spot, right? So you probably know that there is like a Phantom Wikipedia, Eberronpedia, whatever the name. Let's say the characters are coming into a small town. I just opened this Wikipedia, and there's 2 sentences about the town. Let's say there's a Civis station, there's Orion station, and there's a Kenneth Forge. That's it. That's all I need to expand, to explain the city, to expand what they can find there, what possible quests they can pick there, or what information they can gather, right? That's so easy, and that helps a lot to me as a DM, and from what my players are saying, they're happy. They think that I prepared it beforehand, but well, little do they know.
I mean, honestly, I will say one of the things I like, and it is because I know the world so well, but I do my GMing generally is I have a sort of set of notes. I have, these are the important characters, these are places that could go, but I do generally let the players lead because I like that. See what they take with the ideas and things like that. And so, I've been running Threshold for 17 sessions now. And I've got my notes on all the sessions, but none of them were in a form where I could hand it to you and you could just run the adventure off of it. It's all based on these are the bits and pieces and how it clicks as the players work. So I love, I'm just saying that's how I love to play, is to sort of, and what I love about that is if I run the story again for a second group of people, it'll be a completely different experience based on what they decide to do with them.
I think DM knows is a good description of Dial Kirill language.
Yeah, very much so.
The language of chaos.
Yeah.
Maybe you can share with us the character concept you will play or you want to play next in Eberron.
So I've played a lot of Eberron games, which is interesting because usually I'm a DM, but sometimes people like running games for me, and it's fun for me. So I will just say I've been doing some live play games, which you can find at Six Sides of Gaming on their YouTube channel. You can actually see some of the games I've been playing in. So one of the characters I was playing was Merrick Kenneth, who is an artificer, who's one of the big artificers of the setting. And this was because the game I'm playing with Ed Greenwood, the creator of Forgotten Realms, and he's playing Elminster, his sort of wizard character.
That's
and
fun.
so I'm playing Merrick Kenneth. So it's this fun sort of the classic, Gandalf wizard, if you will, against the sort of industrialist, artificer. And so it's sort of we're capturing the differing flavors of our settings in a different way. I also recently was playing a character named who I was calling Rusty, who the idea was a sort of decommissioned Warforged juggernaut. And it's back to that idea of having been built for the war. And he's a barbarian and rune knight. And part of the point is, this is another thing I didn't talk about, but something I encourage a lot with Eberron is you can use the class archetypes, but change the flavor of them. So while Rusty is technically a barbarian, what I say is when he rages, he's not actually getting angry. It's that it's like a special armor mode that has been built into him. And so when he goes into this combat mode, the effect of it mechanically is he deals more damage for a short period of time and he reduces incoming damage. And so, like I said, I display that, I portray it as just a sort of bulking up armor mode because that's what sort of feels right for him. And so Rusty, they're completely different characters because Merrick's, of course, is like a genius who's trying to solve every problem and find a way to make money off of it. Whereas Rusty is a very sort of good-natured, but kick in the door, charge in, and hope that he survives. Sort of much more, I don't want to say goofy, but impulsive for sure. And so that's been fun for me to have those completely different sort of approaches to things. Trying to think what else I'm playing next. I also actually was playing in another game. I'm playing another Warforged, who essentially it's a sort of Spelljammer crossover, and he's like essentially the sort of engineer for our ship, and has like some translation stuff going in. So again, it's the idea that he was built to perform this function. And I like Warforged a lot because I like the whole idea of the character who was made for a purpose but has to figure out what are they beyond just their function. What do they want their role in the world to be? So that's been fun for me.
Yeah, people do truly love Warforged. It is an essential part of Eberron, especially newcomers. I once had like 4 new players to Eberron, and they all have picked 4 Warforged from the 20 different characters.
It is that point of it sums up Eberron in 2 important ways, because first off, it is about that point of this is magic as an industry. This is, you were made to fight. And then also it ties to the point of the war and the question of what happens after it. And, and I hope we will be finding out what happens after it.
But also, in my opinion, Warforged is also a great theme to touch the balance between chaos and law, between nature and civilization and technology. I remember
Absolutely.
I saw this art of Warforged in Exploring Eberron on the front page called Rose. It used to be your character, as I remember correctly.
Yep, that's true.
Yeah, and I fell in love with this concept. Like Warforged is like the top top product of Khaenit, of the Eberron, but it is like the part of the nature. And I created the very similar character called Lilac, in Ukrainian. Yeah,
Very good.
and he basically was like becoming god, Warforged, who like declined the title of Warforged, and he was like forged, and he don't wanted to fight, but like progress life and nature. Yeah. Speaking of which, imagine you want to start a new campaign, or you don't need to imagine. Who would you pick, or what would you pick for your like top antagonists, like top 3 antagonists for player to face? I mean, antagonists in the broader sense, like individuals, entities, or organizations. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, is that Eberron, when you're playing an Eberron campaign, there are a host of different powerful forces to deal with. And what I always suggest to people is don't try and use them all. Focus on basically what I usually focus on is one major threat and one minor threat. Like, what is the thing that the players are dealing with right away? And what is the thing that as they get more powerful, as they go deeper, is going to be the major threat? So in the sort of long-term thing, you have the overlords, which are the sort of ancient evils of the world that have been bound, and any one of them, if released, could cause chaos, destroy a nation, and there's many different ones. So part of the question is, if you choose the Lords of Dust and the Overlords, the story will be different depending on which one you're dealing with. So on the one hand, you have the Lords of Dust. On the other hand, you have the Dalkir, who are, again, sort of from beyond. They're from the far realm. They're the sort of things that twist nature and break it. And so that's more of a sort of Lovecraft, Cthulhu, sort of creepy horror story. And then you also, have the Dreaming Dark, which are manipulating people through dreams. And then finally, the Dragonmark houses themselves. As we said, if you want to go a more mundane, we're not about otherworldly threats, we're about human threats, then you can follow the Dragonmark houses. So all 3 of those sort of work well on a macro scale. On a micro scale, 2 of the very easy ones to use, as sounds like you're dealing with in your Threshold campaign. The Order of the Emerald Claw is very much these are just bad guys. They're causing trouble. They're causing chaos. The one you're dealing with, Cults of the Dragon Below, are these cults that spring up tied to the Dalkir or tied to the Overlords. And part of the point is that's something that can spring up anywhere, but they are ultimately, at the end of the day, sort of small isolated problems. They aren't plotting and controlling resources across the world. So it's an easy thing that you're dealing with a cult of the Dragon Below, but once you can solve that problem, you can take out that particular cult. Another one in that scale of play, or 2 others, the Aurum, are a sort of smaller scale version of the Dragonmark houses. The Aurum are basically, I like to say, they're James Bond villains. They're people who have a lot of money, and are using it to pursue their own selfish agendas. So again, it's the smaller scale version of the Dragonmark house is the big thing you're going to deal with. And a final one on that sort of level is the Lord of Blades, who is basically a Warforged activist who's trying to rally Warforged and essentially fight against what he sees as the oppression of their creators. So like those are just a bunch of examples of any one of those can be a good, this is what you're going to be dealing with for your first 5 or 6 levels. And then as you go further, you're going to start to realize there's a bigger threat that we'll have to deal with.
I just want to add that I'm a big fan of Harmatan, the Warforged from...
Thank you so much.
Will we get a stat block sometime, maybe?
I hope so. I mean, the funny thing about this, so Harmatan is a character who appears in my novels, who's one of the sort of an agent of the Lord of Blades. And the funny thing was actually, in the original novel, he was supposed to be the Lord of Blades. And they decided they didn't want me to use the Lord of Blades in a novel. And so I had to come up with another character that sort of filled that role. And so I came up with Harmatan, which the idea is that he's a Warforged whose body has been shattered into pieces, but his force of will allows him to actually maintain control over those pieces. And so he can pull them together into a body, a humanoid body, but he can also sort of spread them out into essentially like a blade barrier. He can become like a storm of razors. And beyond that, it's just hard to kill him because you knock him into pieces, so just put himself back together. And so that was again, a fun character. As I say, at the moment, I may have made a stat block for him at some point. I'll have to look. But it was just sort of an idea of a very different kind of Warforged villain.
That's cool. Okay, I think we are ready to wrap up a bit. Just one last question.
Okay.
So it was a pleasure to talk to you finally. And yeah, we really appreciate that you come into the podcast. I hope that will turn even more people into the fold
Absolutely.
of cult of the Eberron, so to say. So the last question is, you have been working on a lot of books, like there is a mini setting inside the Mornland, like the Mind of Dread thing, the Exploring Eberron, the last one, where the
Chronicles of
Eberron, yes,
Yep.
Threshold. Perhaps you can share some insights on what your fans could expect soon from you.
So the next book that I'm working on, is a book we don't currently, we're calling it Hunger. That's not going to be the final name. It's the same way we called Exploring Eberron Project Raptor for a while. And the point is, it is about what we've been calling Threshold. It is taking this town on the edge of Brayland and Droam. And it is going to be a product that includes an adventure, an adventure path that's tied to the town. It's not the same adventure I've been running in my Patreon. So if you've watched the Patreon, you'll get something new here. It's not just the same, but it is about the town, about the region. And among other things, one of the things it will include is rules for playing a lot of monstrous species. So, rules for playing a Medusa, a Warg, a Gargoyle, a Harpy, because being on the edge of Droam, part of the point is these are creatures that you can interact with or play. And, in my current campaign on Patreon, you can see like one of the characters is a kobold, one of the characters is a warg. And, so, you can play a warg as part of this. So that I'm hoping mid-year we'll see. It's been a very busy year for a lot of reasons, but basically it's a thing that I've been working on obviously for about 2 years now. It got put on hold because of some complexities in life, but we will finally be getting something out there so that, you've just dived into Threshold and been running it sort of without that material, but we're saying that material will be coming out for people who would like a little more, you have a concrete foundation to work with.
Thanks. That's exciting.
And I do also, my website is keith-baker.com. I do write articles every week or so. I answer basically questions people pose on my Patreon. So there's hundreds of articles you can read about, ideas I've had about Eberron. Way too many, in fact.
I don't think it will never be enough.
We'll absolutely put links to your Twitter, to your website, and to your Patreon in description and probably somewhere here in the video. So yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Keith, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for Eberron, obviously. And
you're welcome. Thank you for playing.
I hope we will release more videos. Maybe we'll release more videos like about Lore of Eberron, because we want to pick that up and bring to our community this amazing world and expand the knowledge of it in here. So, and if at some point you will accept our invitation again, obviously you're welcome. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you kindly. It was a pleasure talking to you. Yeah, and maybe a few words you want to tell to your fans in Ukraine before we end.
I mean, basically all I can say is I am, so sad for all the struggles and burdens you're carrying, and again, dealing with the things far worse than I've imagined in my setting. And I just hope that you can keep your spirits up and that you will have a better tomorrow ahead. And again, you're in my thoughts at least, and I just hope that there's a better future for all of us. So hang in there.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was inspiring.
I'm again, I wish I were more of a poet. I wish I could say something more just because I can only imagine how hard this is. So again, I'm just glad for a tiny bit it's worth that you were able to find something that can bring you you know, a little bit of happiness amidst it all. So
Yeah.
That's right.
Thank
all
you.
right.
Right.
Well-
Thank you very much, and have a great day.
Yep.
Yeah,
All
we
right.
wish you
and
well.
you too. Again, let me know when it comes out, and I'll share it. And I'd love to talk again sometime. Or as I said, if somehow I can ever get traveling again, I'd be very happy to run a game for you all at some point.
That
Yeah.
would be
Thank
fantastic.
you. Thank
Better
you.
time we hope.
Likewise, absolutely. Yeah.
Bye,
All
guys.
right.